Hey, we here.
Hey,
Let's get it. We in the building.
Teacher Talk Live.
Yeah. How you feeling, sis?
I'm feeling all right. I'm ready to get this fire panel started because it's
telling
so
I'm
good.
telling you.
Correct.
Look, first off, can we give it up for the background over there? The background and the lighting is hitting. Yes. I ain't mad at you. Red lip today. She dangerous.
We are ready. We're coming in hot.
Let's go. Could you go ahead and introduce yourself to the people, and I'll introduce myself to the people, and we'll tell them what we're doing here today.
Yes, my name is Alexia Pendleton, also known as the Dancer Teacher, and I am a part of Teachers for Good Trouble, obviously, but I am a kindergarten teacher, a dance teacher, a choreographer, a fitness instructor, and a mom, all the things, but I am excited to get into some good trouble.
Let's go.
You're a winner.
Let's go. So yes, if you guys don't know who I am, my name is Shivy Alfred Shivy Brooks. I am a high school educator. I teach economics, personal finance, and government here in the Metro Atlanta area. I am one of the founders of Teachers for Good Trouble, and I'm just so excited to be here for our newest, latest, greatest virtual summit. So today we have two great panels for you all today. We are going to be having a conversation about the difference of CRT and CRT. And for those that don't know, that's critical race theory versus culturally responsive teaching. What is the difference between those two things? I think many of us get those confused. We're not as sure exactly what they are, what it means. And this is going to be a time where we're going to debunk some of the mistruths and misperceptions of it. And then on our second panel, which Alexia is going to be moderating, do you want to tell the people what we're going to be talking about?
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about what does it look like in the classroom with our students, how we can infuse that culturally responsive pedagogy, what we can do, what would it look like with our students, and we're going to get into some deep conversation about how we can really do this in our daily walk in our classrooms.
There we go. So I want to encourage you all, please send the registration link out to as many people as you can. Send the YouTube link out. Let's get folks here so that they can witness this conversation. I think it's really critical for us to always be centering the voices of teachers. And that is how Teachers for Good Trouble got started in the very first place. We felt like the needs and the wants and the desires of teachers just have not been heard or listened to by people in positions of leadership. And so we decided we'd create our own platform and we'd make sure that we are heard and that they would not be able to ignore us, which is how up to now, I think we have 37,000 signatures on our petition to standardize testing in schools. So if you guys haven't signed that petition, I encourage you, go to our website, teachersforgoodtrouble.org. If you are not following our page, go to at Teachers for Good Trouble on Instagram. Give us a follow. Stay connected with us. You guys can join in the movement, and let's continue to work on getting change here in America and throughout the world. Lexia, anything that you are excited to see today? What are you looking forward to in the conversations?
I'm looking forward to just the different perspectives that we're going to hear, just the knowledge that's going to be dropped from some dope educators and some doctors in the building, and we're just going to have some fire conversation, and I hope that it creates some inspiration for us, especially now. Teaching in a pandemic is crazy.
Tragedy.
So I think we need it. We need to feel that that motivation and know that what we do in our classrooms, what we need to do, the change that needs to happen. We're not alone, and we are in community with some amazing people. And let's get that inspiration going so we can create that change for not only now, but for our future, for our students and the future that is going to come.
100%. Let's go. So I want shout out to Mr. Jaime Avila, who's working in the background to make this entire thing happen. He did our whole little set design and all the things, man. Shout out Jaime for being a real one and helping Teachers for Good Trouble always look our best in doing these productions.
You're a winner!
You are the man. You are the man. All right, so let's go ahead and bring in our first set of panelists and get this thing going. All right, so first I want to say shout out to my good sister. You guys just saw me on Instagram Live with her, Miss Jody.
You're a winner! You're a winner!
Yup. Then I want
Shout
to
out
give
to
it
you,
up for my
brother.
sis, the one, the only. You got to put respect on it. Dr. Kate Slater.
You're a winner! You're a winner!
Hey, it's so nice seeing us kind of like not on Instagram in like a little skinny box. Like we kind of get to see like the whole situation back there. I like that.
Correct.
And y'all already know this is Mr. International. This man is just one of the biggest supporters of educators throughout the country. He does the real work. Y'all give it up for my brother, Kwame.
You're a winner! You're a winner!
All right. So, also, do we have Brandy and no? That's on the second panel. Excuse me, y'all. I'm messing up. Okay, we are good. So I just want to make sure we weren't missing anybody. We are good. So I want to kick this conversation off. Now we've had a lot of convo about critical race theory, especially coming into this school year. It became like, I don't know, red meat for one particular side of the political spectrum to just, I don't know, create more drama for education as if we needed more right now. It was very interesting. And so I felt like it was very important for us to have a couple scholars, Jody, as well as Dr. Kate, who really study critical race theory and understand it, as well as educators who engage in culturally responsive teaching, which is something that I do, that I know Alexia does, that Kwame does, that I know Jody does, and Kate does. We still do culturally responsive teaching, but there's a difference. And I wanted us to be able to clarify what the differences were, so that people will be better educated. And so when we talk on it, like we make sense out of what we're talking about. So my first question that I want to pose is, what is critical race theory? And how did it become a national conversation? And I'd like to kick that off with Dr. Kate to get it started.
Sure. Hey, y'all. Stoked to be amongst this incredibly illustrious group. So, critical race theory. Critical race theory, to put it quite simply, is a form of scholarship that grew out of critical legal studies. It is, let's just put it down there, it is taught at the graduate level. So back in the early 70s, there was a group of educators at Harvard that were basically looking at law school curriculum and saying, this language of neutrality, of equality that we're seeing in particular civil rights legislation is not actually addressing the ways that systemic racism shows up in this. So, really landmark decisions like affirmative action, Bakke versus Regents of California, Brown versus Board of Education, Milliken. This is all like really famous civil rights legislation that all came down in the wake of Brown versus Board. If you look at the language, it is race neutral. If you look at the way that it plays out, it augments racial disparities in all of the different systems and structures that it is addressing. And so basically, critical race theory was formed to say, how do we develop a framework to actually look at the disparities that are being augmented under the guise of this race neutral language? So I say that to say, nobody is talking about that in a second grade classroom. Nobody is talking about Milliken versus Bradley in a second grade classroom. No one's talking about white flight in a second grade classroom. Now, maybe they should. But the point I'm trying to make is what has happened is you had this particular form of scholarship. And what the right, and particularly a very special human named Christopher Rufo did, was take critical race theory and essentially create this kind of hysteria around it to make it many, many things that it's not, which is blaming white people for its problems, making victims out of all people of color, indoctrinating students. And they've made it this kind of umbrella catch-all phrase for anything related to culturally relevant pedagogy, anti-racist education, anti-bias, anti-racist education. And so they're drumming up all this hysteria about what it's not. Put quite simply, critical race theory offers us a framework for looking at the ways in which systemic racism impacts legislation and systems and structures in this country. And moreover, the ways that systemic racism intersects with individual acts of racism. So it's a very powerful tool to have in the classroom. But actual critical race theory, nobody is sticking that in an elementary school classroom.
Correct.
I'm tired.
Thank you for saying that, because that kind of leads me to my next question, which I'm going to send to Jody. There are so many teachers that have never heard of CRT before this school year, who have never been trained in CRT ever even in through this school year. Yet so many policies are being created to undermine CRT. Why do you think that so many people have made it such a big deal and have basically weaponized it in policy at this time?
I mean, I think to your point, shout out to Dr. Kate, gathering, all of us and teaching us on what critical race theory is and is not. And I want to shout out the great Gloria Ladson-Billings, who is contributor to critical race theory in education, which I feel is part of the ways folks conflate the two between critical race theory and culturally responsive teaching because of her tenets for cultural competencies in the classroom. But I think that it's important that Dr. Kate names that critical race theory is like using a thing to explain a thing, right? It's the method and the framework in which we sort of analyze and find data and evidence to explain systemic and institutional disproportionality, racial disproportionality specifically. And shout out to Gloria Ladson-Billings. I want to say that because my work and my research is heavily grounded in the work that she has already laid out for so many of us in this work. If you haven't already read, a book, I always have this, handy, I'm always going to pull out a book, brother, that explains in thorough detail on critical race theory. And Dr. Kate mentioned, examining power, legislation, policy, special education, curriculum, all of the things. But I think that folks really conflate critical race theory or weaponize critical race theory because of the language that people use to explain it. A lot of folks that weaponize critical race theory do not know what critical race theory is. So the ways in which they define it is the ways in which they weaponize using that against now teachers in the classroom and really creating policy that is destructive and that will continue to further, racial disparities across institutions, throughout this country. For me specifically, I look at education, but across, it's really weaponizing, what folks' understanding really is of CRT. Versus CRT, which is culturally responsive teaching.
Yes, thank you.
So the book I'm going to share, the book is Foundations of Critical Race Theory in Education. This is the second edition. It's a collaboration between scholars. So if you all are looking for a text to really ground your understanding into CRT, what it's not, what it is, this is a baseline for you all to get started.
There we go. Brother Kwame, how are you?
I'm good, Shippy. How you doing, brother?
I'm blessed. I'm blessed. Can you please introduce yourself and tell the people where you're from?
Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, and I'm currently based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, by way of Boston, Massachusetts, by way of Philadelphia. I'm all over the place. Um, but I am an educator. I'm a father, husband. I play many roles. And one thing that people know about me, if you follow me, is that I'm all about disrupting. I'm all about just speaking up and empowering educators all over the globe. So it's what I do, and it's why I'm here.
Let's go. Kwame, what is the difference between culturally responsive teaching and critical race theory? And more so, I would like for you to just kind of define to the people what is culturally responsive teaching.
Well, Shivi, when you look at the two terms, the two CRTs, critical race theory and culturally responsive pedagogy, I don't really see there's a lot of intersection between the two, and I will say that they work hand in hand. So here's how I like to put it to people. If you're applying a critical race lens to your practice, then you're automatically being culturally responsive. So just to give an example, so in critical race theory, and shout out to Dr. K and Dr. Angel Jones for the education because I learned so much from them. If you look at counter narratives, for instance, we actually do that in our schools. But I think the problem is, and Dr. K alluded to this in the first question, I think we get so inundated with the terminology and the highly sophisticated educational jargon that it paralyzes us and doesn't put us in action because we're so caught up in trying to figure out what these things are. And I think that's part of the whole white supremacist playbook is to detract us from, acting and advocating for our students in the classrooms. So when I look at counter storytelling, for instance, look at our books in our libraries, right? There's a difference between diversifying your library and decolonizing it. And there are a lot of resources that are helping us to properly audit the books that we are putting on our shelves. Perfect example, if you're thinking about books that focus on indigenous tribes and indigenous nations, there's a website called AICL, which stands for the American Indians in Children's Literature, which is ran by Dr. Debbie Reese, who's been doing a lot of extensive research on this. And basically, what it's saying is, hey, like, there are actual books that are being written by indigenous authors who have lived this experience as opposed to white folks who are retelling indigenous narratives and providing misinformation, just as an example. But this is applicable to other racial and ethnic groups. If you look at, for instance, just intersectionality, shout out to Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. I mean, these are sophisticated terms, but honestly, it's really about being humane, right? It's really about seeing our students as multifaceted and multidimensional individuals, right? So it's not just, their skin complexion, it's about their faith, it's about their language, it's about their food, right? Even like for Black people, if you think about what Dr. April Baker Belt talks about with anti-Black linguistic racism, where they're policing the way that we speak, right? And even my man Dr. Chris Emden talks about it in Ratchetdemic. Make sure y'all cop this book. Excellent book. They're talking like they're pretty much telling us how we need to orient ourselves in these settings. So whenever we walk into our schools, we're always leaving a piece of ourselves behind at the door in order to navigate these spaces. And that's not what we need to be doing at this point. If we're going to be culturally responsive, right? If we're going to apply the critical race lens, we have to take a closer look at our policies, our curriculum, our disciplinary practices, our pedagogical practices. We have to do a full audit on all those things. And in order for us to do that, we have to read the literature. And that's one of the main reasons why there's so much misinformation being put out there with regard to critical race theory, with regard to culturally responsive pedagogy, with regard to culturally sustaining pedagogy, which is an offshoot of the other CRT. Shout out to Django Paris, right? We have to do that work. And yes, it's extra work, but you know what though? That's what's gonna help us liberate our children and ourselves, because we're just at that point right now.
Correct.
And I just want to say, brother, I think it's important what you're saying, but we have to make, and we have to be responsible to make a distinction, right, between CRT and culturally responsive teaching, and understand what Dr. Cite said on the onset of what critical race theory is and why we don't see it at, K to 12, and why we do see it at the graduate level is because critical race theory is the framework in which researchers analyze, right, that to gather data and evidence to understand how racism is endemic in institutions, right? That's very different. And there are specific tenets that you talked about, Kwame. You mentioned counterstory, you mentioned intersectionality. There are particular tenets in CRT, right, that are used to analyze, that will provide evidence, right? That's why I kind of concretize what Dr. Cite said, right? Like CRT is a thing to understand a thing. It is not a thing in K to 12, right? We cannot conflate CRT to culturally responsive teaching because there are vast differences between the two. Now, culturally responsive teaching is very much centered around pedagogy and instruction. And again, I'm going to cite my sources, right? Like the great Gloria Ladson-Billings that talks, she has 3 tenets, right? She talks about academic achievement, cultural competencies, and social political consciousness, right? Like how are we contributing to those things through our pedagogy and instruction, right? That's at the groundwork, at the foundational level of culturally responsive teaching. Now, CRT is not that. CRT is a thing to try to understand the thing, right? It's like, how is racism endemic, right? And how can we find evidence in policy legislation that calls out power, right? And the way that power has been used in the outcome of racial disparities. Those two things are not the same. We may use tenets of CRT, right, for moves, pedagogical moves for instruction, right, and to investigate curriculum, but it's very important that we understand the difference between the two, which is why Dr. K, circle it back to you. She talks about this being at the graduate level because this is what researchers, including myself, use to either develop or to continue the conversation around why do we see disproportionate outcome in special education? Why do we see overrepresentation of Black boys, to the most restrictive environments, in education, right? We're not teaching that to kindergartners. Kindergartners are not looking at data that tells them why they are overly represented in special education. That's not what they're doing. Now, what you're doing in kindergarten is that you might focus on student achievement, you might focus on cultural competency, and you might think about your social political consciousness and the way you're bringing that into the classroom. But kindergartners are not analyzing or researching why a particular policy or law puts them in the position that they're in. I'm just saying, Dr. Kate.
No, that I am so glad you said that, because
Yeah.
you're bringing up a really critical point. So, for example, let's look at the second tenet of CRT in education. This is according to Daniel Solorzano, which is,
can you review all the tenets, Dr. Kate, just so that we all have shared language?
Yes,
Please.
yes. So I am citing Dr. Angel Jones, citing Danny Solorzano. So the levels are deep. So one of the tenets is the permanence of racism. So understanding that racism is not a fleeting thing. It is the fabric of our society. The second tenet is challenging dominant ideologies and deficit perspectives. The third tenet is centrality of experiential knowledge, which, Kwame, to your point, that's the notion of counter storytelling, which is centering the lived experiences of people of color. 4 is interdisciplinary analysis. So the ways in which CRT can't be limited to kind of one field, but needs to take sociological analysis and gender theory analysis and policy analysis. And then the last one is the mission of social justice, which actually, if you look at the foundations of CRT, again, one of the things to remember is the people who founded it were movers and shakers. They were not interested in preserving the status quo. They were like, let's upend this. Derek Bell, like the forefather of critical race theory, he was on his way out from Harvard when critical legal studies and CRT was coming about. The Harvard couldn't keep him because he was, they were treating him like trash. But I think you both have made, yes, exactly. So I think you both have made a really critical point, which is the two, CRT and culturally relevant pedagogy, are different. If we take the second tenet, for example, which is challenges to the dominant ideology and challenges to deficit notions, from a CRT lens, we are looking at policies that preserve that deficit narrative of students of color. You're looking, at the achievement gap, or quote, and I'm using that term very, very the achievement gap, things like that, when you're talking about overrepresentation of students of color in special ed, when you're talking about overrepresentation of students of color that receive punitive sanctions that are really disproportionate compared to white students. Those are all things that CRT would look at and say, how do we challenge this deficit notion that is surrounding the experiences of students of color in K-12? To your point, Kwame, you can do that individually in a classroom as well. You're reading, some trash kids book, and you're saying, why the hell is it depicting, a very one-dimensional view of people of color, or, for example, an indigenous population, or why is it telling this whitewashed narrative? So both of those things, they're separate and they're related. You can use the CRT lens. The problem there is that what the right wing and enemies of CRT have done is say, we're putting it all together because we're mad that they're challenging the deficit notion, full stop. Doesn't matter if you're doing it in K-12 in your own individual classroom. Doesn't matter if you're doing it with CRT by challenging it through policies and analysis. We're just mad that you're challenging our dominant whitewashed ideology. End of story. And so the problem there is that this is all kind of a symptom of white supremacist backlash. And they're taking anything, you want to look at the terminologies, they are grasping at straws of different teaching methods and pedagogical methods that center the voices of students of color as salient and relevant and valid in their own right, and saying, nope, get out of here. This is all that woo-woo CRT nonsense. And by conflating it, they're kind of creating this tornado of backlash and misunderstanding and misinformation.
Well, with that said, 2020 brought us a summer of marching for social justice, post George Floyd, which then brought us a year of proverbial listening and learning, listening and we're just here listening and learning, right? How did America go from listening and learning and encouraging conversations about race to legislatively banning conversations about race? Okay. Kate, you want to jump back into that one?
No, I think that what we're seeing is whitelash, 100%. And I'll let both Jody and Kwame take it, but I think what we're seeing is the white backlash of what happens when white people actually have to interrogate their privilege and interrogate the dominant position that we hold in a white supremacist society. And so all of that really nice listening and learning is actually falling apart at the seams when white people recognize the heavy, heavy lift that we have to do to divest from whiteness and white supremacist structures.
Is it that they listened and learned and they didn't like what they heard, or did they never listen and learn at all?
I mean, I can't tell you what the white people are listening to with our podcasts and our books and what our reading list is looking like. I find it hard to believe that if there was any kind of significant investment in an understanding of the history of systemic racism, that you can just pivot and be like, nah, I'm not about that life. But this is kind of the insulation that white supremacy secures for us white people. You can know about the history and say, nah, don't want to deal.
And I want to make the distinction that this is about whiteness, because it's not just a white people problem. You know, we uphold whiteness, you know, and these policies as Black folks, as Indigenous folks, as folks that, you know, align ourselves to these policies. So I want to make that distinction that this is not about white people, but this is about whiteness and white supremacy, right? Like we saw that after the election of Barack Obama, we have a Trump, right? Like we understand what happens when people do not want to subscribe and want to hold on to white supremacy. And that's why CRT exists, because people want to hold on to power, and we need to understand how power has created particular outcomes for racialized communities. So I think that Dr. K is spot on to talk about white rage and white lash in terms of folks protecting whiteness and white supremacy and their comfort and their power. And that's why we have, you know, critical race theory to really analyze and find evidence and be able to articulate why we need to be fighting for, you know, racial equality, why we need to fight, you know, for full citizenship in this country, right? Where we're under the guise of full citizenship, but we know that our experiences as Black folks in this country is not the same, you know, depending on where you fall within this caste system and this falsehood of power. So, you know, I think that Dr. K is spot on when she's talking about, like, listen, we don't know what y'all listening to, but we know that for certain, folks want to hold on to their power and their privilege, you know, across racial lines. We know that white folks have a particular amount of work, you know, that they need to do, but this is across, you know, all of us, because, you know, back to Kwame, I read Ratchetdemic. A lot of us have been Oreos and protecting whiteness and upholding whiteness, you know, across this country. So, you know, right now I'm in Oreos Anonymous. So, you know, I have to continue to build up my scholarship in critical race theory. So I'm able to articulate and explain, you know, why things are the way that they are in this country.
And then also to add on to what the ladies have beautifully articulated, I think it's important to note that, you know, listening, learning, and encouraging conversations about race and racism are important. But if that is the ceiling of, so I feel like the reason why there's a shift now and why you have, you know, right wingers and even conservatives, you know, doing everything possible to shut down the scholarship, whether it's any of the CRTs, is because now it's gone beyond that. Now there's some real action taking place. People are speaking up. People are now challenging policies and legislation. And because it's become a threat to this hierarchical structure that's been maintained for all these generations, that's why people are getting shook. When it was just, oh, let's do some, you know, seminars and panels and just, you know, intellectualize, you know, race and racism in America, it was all good. but it wasn't that big of a threat. Now, like, we're doing some real things. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you.
And also, I just want to say, brother, real quick, like the reason why CRT has had such a white lash and white rage is because folks do not want to reckon with the history of this country. Folks don't want to like that racial reckoning of the original sin of this country, like to really understand how racism is endemic, you know, in all parts of institutions in this country. That is why, you know, folks will say like CRT is racism, right? Because they anything that goes against or that outshows, right, what this country has done and what its policies in terms of housing, education, I mean, like anything, right, what is done to a particular group of people, people don't want to reckon with that. So we see a white lash or white rage because like we've seen forever, people just want to tuck away and want folks to get over it. So I wanted to name that for all of us.
Thank you.
And by CRT calling something systemic as opposed to individual, that's where a huge part of this white lash comes from. Because if it's individual behaviors, any person that subscribes to whiteness or upholding racism can be like, well, that's not me. That's not me. But if you have to look at the ways that it's embedded, you know, as Jadi said, it's endemic, then you have to reckon with the ways in which we all uphold this whiteness and all uphold these white supremacist structures.
So we are, you know, kind of fluidly using two terms, white as in white people and whiteness, right? And so there are a lot of folks who don't know what the difference is, and they believe that there is a conversation happening about one thing. And so I asked, you know, Dr. K, I know you explained this very well, and Kwame, if you feel like chiming in as well, but can you explain what is the difference between white people and whiteness?
Right. There's white, me, who was born without a drop of melanin in my skin. And I can't help being born white. What I can help is whether or not I engage in behaviors, structures, and policies that uphold white dominant culture and white supremacy. So by that, I mean, this is a country that was built for wealthy white men. And in many, many, many ways, there are still multiple structures, systems, policies, and legislation that preserve that, like at all costs. You look at the demographics of the GOP, and it's kind of right there. And so people cannot help being born white, but they can help engaging in behaviors that preserve that white supremacy, that preserve that whiteness, that preserve white dominant culture. And by white dominant culture, I mean upholding white ways of being, white ways of knowing, white knowledge as the default by which we measure everything else, which by virtue serves to other anything that is not white. And so there's a really clear distinction. And that's why Jadi made the most important point, which is that anyone can uphold whiteness. In a white supremacist society, anyone can uphold whiteness. So there's a very big distinction between being a white person and subscribing to and upholding whiteness.
Correct.
Also, real quick, could you please define the term endemic for the folks? We've been using that term fluently as well. Look, we got educators in the building, so if we're gonna do one thing, we're gonna teach today. Okay.
Period. And we're at Teachers for Good Trouble, so you already know. And language is important. I want to say,
Yes.
and I think it's important for us to make the distinction between language. But endemic just means like that, you know, it's prevalent. You know, it's part of the fabric, you know, of the systems that were built, you know, in this country, from schooling to, you know, I'm always talking in a schooling sense, right? And to add on to Dr. King's point, right, like whiteness was offered and given to folks, right, as property, right? Like it's something that didn't exist, right, but it was given to folks as power, right? And the characteristics of who was white, of who was pure. And if you're not a part of that, or there were some, that's why, shout out to Dr. Yaba Blay, whose book is called One Drop, right? That's why One Drop exists, because there were clear consequences if you had one drop of Blackness to you, and what that meant, and what were the consequences of such. So I did also want to add to Dr. K in terms of whiteness as property, how it started, why folks were given it, and how it's been used as, how it's been used really to uphold power. But endemic is just like, it's at the very fabric, of this country. We can all say that we live on stolen land, right? I call the place that I live New York, but that's not the original name of the land that I sit on. I sit on Lenape land, so I also want to name that in the space, right? And I want to also make that distinction right from the beginning. The foundation of this country is based on looting, and who was going to hold on to that, to those powers.
Facts. Kwam, we also talked about how anyone, even non-xenotypically white people, can uphold whiteness, or how non-white people laud or value proximity to whiteness. What does that look like? And especially, what does that look like in our schools?
Oh man, Shivy. Now I gotta go a little personal with this one.
Okay.
As somebody who went to an all-white high school, I could say this: like, internalized racism is real, right? So when Dr. K talks about how non-white people, particularly people of color like myself, uphold whiteness, I mean, it's the default. I mean, that's how, like when we are born, we're pretty much inheriting these ideals without even realizing it. And it happens over time. And then when you get to, our ages, like, I'm now in my late 30s. Now I'm starting to engage in this unlearning process. And I'm now starting to reflect on how, I've engaged in whiteness. So just one example, I think as Black people, we tend to put our Blackness on trial. We have our own definition of what Blackness is, in terms of our experiences. And what we do is, okay, like, you don't know how to, I don't know, play spades. Like, I can't play
Why was
spades
that
to
the
save my
example
life.
I was about to call out, yo? Like, literally.
Yo, I wrote a whole article about this, dog. A whole article about this. I feel like we
But
tend to do it to each
Kwame,
other.
can you? I'm just kidding. I'm just
I
kidding.
know. Listen, I know the rules, but I renege like crazy. Like, you don't want to be my partner. Like, if we're partners, we're not gonna be friends no more. You're not gonna be my friend no more. So
Black folk
I,
take they space serious.
I'm
And,
trying
and,
to tell
and if
you.
you're an adult, we ain't trying to teach you either. That'd be the problem.
But yeah. So that's just, yeah, it's funny. But at the end of the day, too, it does bring about some trauma, because
Yes.
if we don't adhere to a certain definition of Blackness, and let's be clear, Blackness is not norm. There's no norm definition for what it is. We all have different experiences, and Blackness comes in different manifestations. So that's something that we need to point out. And that's even the case for whether we're talking about um, indigenous nations, whether we're talking about AAPI people. So I'm sorry, AAPI, Asian, Pacific Islander people,
Yep.
Latinx people. Like, regardless of what the culture is, there's variations, there's differentiations within each. So I think, like in my case, coming from Connecticut, people said that I talk like I was white because I was articulate. I didn't grow up in the hood. I grew up in a suburban area, right? So therefore, I'm in closer proximity to whiteness as a result of me living in a suburban neighborhood. Even though I come from a West African neighborhood, I'm West African background, even though both my parents are from Ghana and they're both college educated, which is another thing too, because they're both college educated, that's like a hit against my blackness. And these are some of the narratives that are being spewed, within our community. And that's what keeps us at a distance, and it prevents what Jari talks about with anti-racist solidarity, because we have these narratives that happen where like we can't even come together to look at the commonalities and what brings us together in this fight for liberation, because we're so caught up in putting these false narratives out there. So I think that's just something that we still have to work through.
Thank you. Thank you so much for using a personal, kind of anecdotal perspective on validating what we're talking about. I think, one of the things that all people of color, and I'll speak just, as a Black American, as a multiracial Black American, right? My mom is half Chinese, was born in Guyana. I am, gosh, like a high percentage indigenous American as well. So as a person who comes from so many different backgrounds, I can remember things that I said as a kid that were centering whiteness or valued or lauded proximity to whiteness for so long. I'm even going into politics as I'm running for city council now. I think of like some of the things that are expected of me to do as someone running for office, which goes into centering whiteness, a way you need to dress, a way you need to present, things you need to change about yourself, all different. I mean, I look back a year when Teachers for Good Trouble first launched, and I look at the video that I created on the rooftop talking about my wife's godfather who had passed away to COVID. And I was looking at my beard and how long my beard was, right? So like in our culture, men having beards, that's a thing. And I remember going into it and I look at like how my beard has changed as I'm engaging in politics and that kind of thing, right? Like it's the things that you sometimes even subtly do that you don't necessarily pay attention to. And it has everything to do with the defaulting of a culture that's not mine. I
Yeah.
think you got to be conscious of that.
Yeah, I think it's important, brother, that you name that, right? That's whiteness, right? It's white normative standards. It's the ways in which we're indoctrinated, belief systems in terms of the ways in which that we need to behave, what we need to do to assimilate, right? For some folks, it's part of their survival. But I think it's important for us to name that, right? Because these have like real consequences, for folks in terms of how they experience, particular systems or institutions, right? Or even if they have opportunity or access to particular institutions, right? But I think that what we're trying to name, right, in terms of whiteness, is white normative standards, right, that uphold white supremacy and whiteness. For me, I'm always going to speak, again, I'm always going to speak in terms of the schooling system and schooling institutions, and the way that shows up for us in terms of policy structures, and systemically, we talk about, standardized education. We talk about overrepresentation of students in special education. We talk about curriculum. We talk about all of these things that have real consequences on the ways in which students experience schooling institutions in this country.
Yes. So we're about to close out our panel. Before we go, could you briefly just offer one piece of advice that we can give to educators on how to limit confusion on critical race theory as opposed to ethnic studies, and perhaps a word of encouragement to continue making their classrooms safe, authentic spaces for Black and brown babies. I'll start off with Kwame. I'll give it to you first. Dr. K, and then Jadi will be last.
All right. My word of advice would be, and this is from the great James Baldwin, and he says, a teacher who is not free to teach is not a teacher. So when we think about the times that we're in currently, with all the anti-CRT legislation, anti-trans legislation, there's all these things going on. We can't be idle in our efforts. We have to continue to do what we need to do to disrupt. And even as a Black man, I know that racial battle fatigue is going to continue to accumulate. Like, that's just inevitable. But if that's what's going to liberate my babies, that's what I'm going to do. As far as what we need to do moving forward to address the misinformation and to prevent the conflation of the two terms that we've been talking about, we just have to be in the spirit of educating each other. So this is a perfect example of how we do that. Scaffolding language, scaffolding this very highly sophisticated jargon that can be confusing to those who may not be in the academic space like myself. That's why I always defer to, my sisters who are on the panel, because I learned so much from them. And they're the ones who are doing the heavy research, and they're reading the publications, doing the lit reviews, and doing all that stuff that, quite frankly, can be intimidating for so many. Mm-hmm. But we do have to engage in those in that type of dialogue where we're just scaffolding language and making it so that it's digestible and it's easy for everybody to access. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Love that.
Dr. K.
Kwame, I'm building off of your advice and saying that some advice that I would give is to cite your sources and ask other people to cite their sources as well. If we are going to fight if we are going to fight...
I had to drop a bomb on that. Because there's a lot of thought leadership thieving that goes on. Okay. And people pretend that they are the authority or most knowledgeable on particular topics, and they know not what they speak of, but they definitely thieve from Black women often. I'm just saying. Okay, I'm sorry.
100%. I think that we've seen plenty of examples in recent media where if you are hearing misinformation about CRT and you ask someone where in the hell they got that information, it falls apart immediately. Because if you can't cite your sources, if you can't actually say where you're getting this misinformation, it's just a straw man. It's just a straw man for you wanting to, again, preserve this racist dominant ideology. And I think there's great power in us as educators saying what we don't know, saying we don't know enough about this particular area of CRP or CRT. We're all works in progress. There are very few people in this country right now who are experts at CRT. And so there's great power in us saying, I don't know. And to that end, to keep going, find your community. Teachers right now, I think there's such a spotlight on what you're doing, especially if you're incorporating culturally relevant pedagogy, culturally sustaining pedagogy in your classroom. And the number one thing you can do is find strength in numbers. So find the people who are doing that similar work, because it's a lot harder to, well, I don't want to say that because I think y'all are going through it. But it's if the spotlight is spread out a little bit among a group of agitating educators, makes it a little easier to bear. So stick with your community and find your community.
Correct.
And last but definitely not least, my sister Jadi, your piece of advice to educators.
Come on, leave the last word to the Black woman. I know that's right. My brother is intentional up in his joint. But I just have to say, communal excellence is contingent upon having a learner stance, reflection, and community. I like to build off Dr. Kate. Learner stance, do what you need to do, whether it's listening, reading, attending a conference, you're here at Virtual Summit. right? Lean into what you don't know, what you do know, continue to grow in that space. But we need to always have a learner stance. We are always in the pursuit of, we never arrive. We always are going. So it's very important for us to understand that. Reflection, how is it showing up for you? Where are you uncomfortable? Who do you need to lean into, right? What do you need to lean into? Do you have all the facts, multiple perspectives? All of that is important. And communal excellence requires community. We all do not have the answers, which means that we all individually do not have the solutions. This is a collective process. So for us, we need that. I would say follow Dr. Cite. I would say follow Dr. Angel Jones, who are experts in critical race theory. They are scholars of this work. I will say, to the OG Gloria Ladson Billings, if y'all have not read or have this text, please do yourself a favor and get it. Listen to it. Get it on Audible. If you don't want to read. Or on YouTube. There are a plethora of videos that the GOAT is giving us for free. There's also, Kimberly Crenshaw, which is also a pioneer in this work, Derek Bell. Lean into your learner stance. If you don't know something, find it, and if you don't know how to find it, reach out to community that I'm sure will point you in the right direction. And I just want to say it's always an honor and privilege to be in community with the amazing Dr. Cite and Kwame, and you, my brother Shiv. So y'all the best.
Love y'all. Thank you all so much for lending your voices to this conversation. I pray that we have brought more clarity to those who maybe didn't know the difference between ethnic studies, culturally responsive pedagogy, culturally responsive teaching versus CRT, as we know is critical race theory, which is shared everywhere. So I hope this brought some clarity to some folks. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for being on this panel. And we're about to get ready to open space for my sister Alexia, the dancer teacher, to kick off her panel. Let's get it. Hey.
Thank you guys. That was so fire.
Yo, I really learned so much myself. There were so many questions and so many things that came up, like especially the difference between white and whiteness, the difference between critical race theory and culturally responsive pedagogy, and all of those things. I think I learned some things. I hope that the people did too. And I'm really excited to hear your panel and this great conversation that's coming.
Yes, I'm excited as well. And I just appreciate just sometimes, like, as educators or teachers or whatever, we don't really get that insight. So because leave it to RPD, we won't learn anything. So I appreciate this space. I appreciate the knowledge and just the gems that were dropped by everyone on that panel. So thank you guys so much. And we are going to get into the next part about inclusion and what it looks like in the classroom. And we're going to meet some amazing educators that are in the field, that are doing the work. So let's get into it.
Let's do it.
You're a winner! You're a winner!
All right, y'all. All right, it looks like almost everybody is in. How is everybody doing?
So good. So pumped to be here.
Awesome. I'm so excited to get into this. Thank you guys for your time. I know I am exhausted just being in the classroom day in and day out. It's like a whole nother level of exhaustion. So thank you for being here. And we're going to get into this dope panel session and get into the power of inclusion in the classroom. And I just think that it's so important for me as a kindergarten teacher, especially that I work with the littles, that we want to create an experience in a space where our kids that we are bringing up and teaching, they don't have to unlearn and learn as much as we have had to do. So I'm going to introduce the panel, and then we're going to get into some questions. So we have first Sarah Bagwen, and she is an early childhood educator of 15 years. She started teaching in Las Vegas 15 years ago after moving from Long Island, New York. So everybody give it up for Sarah. Yes. Yes, the next person we have is right here, Daryl Manise. Am I pronouncing that right?
So close, Manesse.
Manesse, I'm sorry, Daryl. Manesse.
No worries.
Okay, Daryl has become an advocate for equal and equitable representation of marginalized students and has committed himself to create an inclusive curriculum. Currently, Daryl works as a science high school teacher and GSA, Genders and Sexualities Alliance advisor. So welcome, Daryl, into the panel. We also have Brandy Henderson. Brandy is a middle school master educator with 9 years of experience. She currently serves students and their families in the metro Atlanta, Georgia area, where she was born and raised. So welcome, Brandy, to the panel. The next person we have, Bobby Morgan. Bobby Morgan is an educator, writer, speaker, and consultant with over a decade in education. He is the founder of Liberation Lab consulting firm. So welcome, Bobby. Yes. The next person we have is Gary German, and he's a newly appointed project facilitator, previously a behavioral interventionist for 10 years. He worked with providing various student support, including social emotional learning, as well as staff. 28 years in the education profession. So welcome, Gary. And last but not least, the Queen, Janetta Ellison. She is an educator, a change agent, and advocate of exceptional learners. She is currently a special education teacher and RTI coach in Pasadena, California. And there is the Queen Janetta. That is our panelist. So welcome to all of you. And we are going to get it kicked off with the first question. And just because there's a lot of us, we'll kind of kick it and go from there, and let's see where the conversation takes us. So the first question I have for everyone is, do we have a responsibility to create space for students who have problematic perspectives that may be emotionally harmful or culturally insensitive? So what is our position as educators? Are we responsible for that? Or should we take a back seat? So I'm going to kick it off we'll start off with the Queen Janetta, and then we'll take it from there.
You're too sweet. Hi, everyone. Do we have a responsibility? I believe so. When we think about inclusive environments, we want to make sure that everyone is included regardless of their perspective. But our job as an educator is being able to facilitate that conversation. That does not allow for us to put our opinion in, but to help facilitate a conversation where the students can learn and build from it. So I do think we do have that responsibility to create that space for all students to share their perspective. And it's just about learning those skills to learn how to navigate that conversation where others' feelings are protected and creating that safe space. So one of the things you can do is start off like the community circles, establishing the expectations or community contract while we're sharing this space. And then just also knowing your students, right? Having those type of conversations, it does take you having some knowledge of the students that you're working with so that you can kind of, finesse your way and kind of avoid certain questions if you can. But to answer the question in simple terms, yes, I do believe we have responsibility.
All right. Does anybody have a follow-up on that? I know it may be different from for me, I'm a primary teacher. So I love that Janetta said incorporating it into that morning meeting or routine. But what does it look like maybe for a high school educator or intermediate educator? So I'm going to kick it over to Bobby and see what your insight is.
Yeah, so I wholeheartedly agree. I think often in the spaces where we're creating inclusive environments, the two things happen simultaneously. When we welcome a child in who may have problematic, whether it be emotional development or other things, they gain proximity to the community, which then helps restore one and their thinking and their mindset, right? Often our exclusionary practices further wound, further harm, and put that child in a space where they recognize that they don't ever belong. And so when they do come into our classrooms, yeah, they're going to tear it up because we've shown them over and over again that they don't belong. And then the second thing is students who are coming in with these behaviors and these things, they don't happen in isolation, right? By the time a kid gets to me in middle school, they've endured 6, 7, 8 years of, exclusionary practices, being told that they don't belong. Words have been weaponized against them. Grades have been weaponized against them. And so we have to do the work of restoring one and healing in our classrooms because they've been wounded before they get to us.
I absolutely agree. I believe it starts with all of us. And I think the foundation needs to be laid early on so that we can take it. And every year the kids can take it with them. And then we can create a better, culture and community in our classrooms. So I'm going to switch up and just add on. And Daryl, I want to hear from you. How do you find a balance between hearing different perspectives and then creating that safe space for your students?
I always said on my first, day one of the school year, it's always, guys, you can say whatever you needed to in the space. We're here to hear each other. And I think I always tell them too, we need to be comfortable having these uncomfortable conversations, right? Especially as high schoolers, you're steps away from being in the adult world. So it's good to facilitate these conversations, right? There was this amazing TED Talk that I saw called Being Comfortable with Being Uncomfortable. And it's about having those really difficult conversations. And I think we need to have a good mixture of that mainstream narrative that is so pumped into our curriculum, into our school policies, into everything else, as well as counter narratives to kind of balance things out and give a little bit more equitable representation. One of my favorite professors and authors, Bettina Love, always talks about becoming a co-conspirator as opposed to just an ally, right? So being able to use our privilege and positionality as educators to cause a shift within our classrooms.
I love that. Brandy, I'm going to take it over to you as well. What do you feel, or how do you create that safe space for your students?
So as a middle school educator, and I teach 7th and 8th graders. So some of my classes are a room full of 7th graders, and some of them are a room full of 8th graders. And they are a diverse group of learners. And one thing that I do, and a lot of teachers I know do this, learning just something simple, learning style surveys, student interest surveys. Those are just simple tasks that educators can do. But you turn those tasks into lessons as you're building your lesson plans, as you're formulating a safe environment for your students. You have to use some of those joys, things that make them happy, things that they have been exposed to, or some things that they have not been exposed to. You have to use that to formulate your lessons and activities and connect it to your curriculum and to your standard. I will say that I have an advantage a little because I'm an English teacher. And so it's a broad, many different perspectives that I can teach from, where I do pull text, literature, literacy. I pull different types of texts to bring in an inclusive environment. I also realize that some of the problems that may appear in the classroom comes from home. They stem from home because a lot of parents and a lot of people of the community, sometimes they just don't know. So something that I do, I include certain things in my syllabus. I include a letter in my syllabus to let them know that I have a classroom where everyone is included. It doesn't matter, your religious background. It doesn't matter what your identity is. It doesn't matter your sexual orientation. And it's not the easiest thing to do either. There is a healing process within that, because with middle schoolers right now, they love to entertain each other before they entertain the teachers, before they love to, show themselves off first with each other, with their peers. So it's our business as educators to help them feel comfortable with all types of people and relate it and give them real world experiences, show them videos, music. It's the music that we play. Just something so simple. It's the way that we greet them. Something so simple. And so those are, I take those things that I do at the beginning of the school year and I incorporate them into my lessons, not only to promote literacy, but to promote culture and inclusiveness in my classrooms too. Great question. Thank you.
I love that. And I love that you said, you know what, we're getting kids from all different backgrounds, all different cultures, and infusing that and being able to have a respect there and a foundation that we build is so important for our classroom and our classroom community. But I want to take it a step further, and Sarah, I'm going to send this to you.
Can I jump in real quick? Can I jump in real quick?
Go ahead, Gary.
Hey, how are you guys doing? Brandy, I just want to, I'm so glad that you did mention SEL, social emotional learning. That is like the key right there for many of our classrooms, especially when you want to do or get the students to learn different perspectives, to start your class daily with that, or even on Google Meets or whatever, you can make your own poll and check the temperature of those kids. And so they can see each other. How are they actually doing today? You just doing those basic things with students builds community in your class. And then also too, that means comfortability comes. Then that's a safe place. Then actually some of the kids start talking a little bit more, but then also too, building those communities in schools. That's a big way to help us with a lot of these different perspectives when it comes to all the different types of people that we are.
Thank you for that insight, Gary. And since we're kind of on the topic with you right now and you're on the big screen, how does that, because you are an educator and now you're a behavior specialist, how does that go together, and how do you kind of use that now, and how maybe could teachers infuse that into their practice as well?
Yeah, basically using a lot of social emotional, there's a curriculum out there. There's different curriculums. Also too, I think, Brandy, again, you mentioned something about videos. Kids tune in more to, like you said, music, visuals, all of that. If we use those things, letting them see different perspectives, even in their face, on camera, whatever, they get that. And I recently now just changed over to an online school. And even at the school too, even just building your curriculum, even if you're doing your layouts for your modules for these students, for the high schoolers especially, when they have to go and do online work, they do it through modules. If you can give them mostly visuals, videos, things like that, they can relate to. Finding those relationships in the curriculum is like incredible for student engagement.
I absolutely agree, especially as a kindergarten teacher. Just having the different forms or different ways for our kids to learn is super important, just in general for their overall wellness, but also for their learning. So Sarah is also a fellow kindergarten teacher. So I want to know kind of, what do you do? It's sometimes a little bit harder to address the younger students and incorporate such different things in the classroom, especially when they're so young. We kind of have to teach them everything. So what is your stance on this?
So one thing that I do that I know I got from you, and is also something that Brandy said, is music and the videos. So the Jewish holidays just happened, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and they're the biggest holidays for my religion for the year. And they're within a week of each other. So I was like, okay, I could try to explain it all, or I could hop online, which is what I did. And I found there's so many different versions of Sesame Street. So there's an Israeli version, Shalom Sesame, where they talk about the Jewish holidays. So I played the videos for them and I explained this is why I wasn't here, because I was home celebrating my holidays with my family. And we talked about the foods we were eating, because, food is my love language. So food we were eating and music we listened to, and some of the songs that I was teaching my own children at home, I was singing in the classroom too, because music and food and those videos really are the best ways to bridge those gaps. And even with our younger scholars, I find it so important to expose them to these different perspectives. And the way I explain it is a lot of the adult problems that we see in the world could not happen if the adults could understand somebody else's perspective. So if we start now, especially in kinder, I just can imagine the kind of amazing leaders we would have if more people took the time to teach understanding different perspectives.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in real quick and say one of the things that I've noticed, especially in middle school, is my middle schoolers are very quick to tell me what they don't like. And so what I do is leverage that to my advantage. When they first come into my room, I don't talk about me. I don't give them the PowerPoint. I don't talk about my interests, who I am. I say, listen, before we even talk about me, I want to know about you. And so how we're going to do this is I have them in groups and we're talking about the world's worst teacher. My rules are you can't name anybody, right? You can't say anything about, but tell me the ingredients of the world's worst teacher. What do they do? What do they make you feel like? And you'll be surprised to hear about all the things that a student will share in that environment when they feel like, oh, everybody understands and has felt that before. And then I say, okay, from this space, now tell me about what you want a teacher to do. Tell me what you want them to sound like, how do you want them to inspire you? And from that place, they make a class expectations for me. And I say, I want you to hold me to this. If I don't do this, I need you to call me out. Because in that space, then they say, okay, you know what? He actually does care about me, because he's not saying this is what I expect you to do when you come into my classroom. I'm saying, no. I want you to challenge me. I want you to make me better. And so often we set up our classrooms kind of like, this buffet. You come in, you just kind of get served or whatever have you, but then we never teach our students to partner with us in the learning process. And so I want to be able to do that in how I structure everything. And so I try to be strategic in that.
I really love the centering the students. And that's the most important part. That's why we're there anyway, is to make sure that we center them, and hearing from them just creates a stronger bond and relationship. And that makes for so much success in the classroom. And I really think that everybody is kind of talking on the same page and just have great ideas about how we can infuse this into our classroom. But it's making me think about, well, what if our curriculum, sometimes, and a lot of the times, our curriculums and the things that we have to use are coming from white-centered point of view. A lot of the resources are not inclusive of our students. So what do you do maybe about that? Or what do you do in your classroom to kind of ensure that it is inclusive? And anybody want to start us off with that?
I'll speak on that quickly. I'm sorry.
Brandy.
One little minute. You supplement. So the texts that you are given in the curriculum, the resources that you're given in the curriculum, if it's not inclusive to the community of students that you serve, or just inclusive period, then you supplement. The text that I currently have, what the district provides us, is not relatable for my students, and it's not current. And so you as the educator, you have to find resources that fits the need of your students, period. That's what you do. You supplement. And you supplement in a way, you have to be very creative and strategic, because you can use any standard and match it to connected to any real world experience, connected to any experiences or things that you feel like that your students needs to be exposed to. That's what you do. You supplement. Sometimes you don't have to use, there are plenty of resources out there now, where it is inclusive. And I am happy to find that there are more authors. There are more there are more teacher leaders on Instagram that are creating spaces and creating resources that are for the different types of students that we may have in our classes. And so I normally don't use a lot of the text that is given to me. I will stick to the standard, but I expose them by using other texts.
I love that. And I agree with you. Sometimes, if not most times, it doesn't kind of go with what we need and what our students need. So we have to supplement. Does anybody else have anything they would like to add, or maybe that they have tried to supplement? And maybe sometimes this comes with backlash. This comes with backlash from administration or other teachers that are like, well, they're not following this and they're not following that. But how do we continue to do and get into that good trouble and do what's best for our kids?
I have a couple examples, if you don't mind.
Daryl, take it away.
So on top of teaching science, I'm also teach sex ed at my school at the high school level. And I always tell my students to, like Bobby and Brandy, the standards for sex ed are not great. So I hit the standards, but at the same time, much like my other colleagues here, I bring in my own resources too. But not just other readings and stuff, I bring in lived experience. As a gay Asian growing up, I didn't have that conversation. There was no room for me in sex ed. But on top of that too, it's cultivating this more adult, more dynamic dialogue as opposed to discussion, and allowing my students to also bring in their lived experiences too. Because by allowing myself to be vulnerable first, it creates that space for them to be also vulnerable, there you go, with me. And then it also allows them to learn from each other. So again, much like Bobby said, it's creating more of a student-centered environment as opposed to just me up the front PowerPointing my way through. And then, but it's also, I do hit a lot of backlash, especially from parents, that we are talking about such sensitive topics. So there's always room for disagreement, but I try to make sure that my kids are, being able to have good dialogue with each other.
And I love that you said that the parents, because that's kind of like the next thing that I want to kind of target is, well, what if your parents don't agree? Or what if a parent has a problem? Does anybody have lived experience or have any suggestions on how we could kind of like make sure that the parents are on the same page, but we're doing what's best for the kids? So does anybody want to share kind of how they're feeling on that topic?
I'll jump in. Oh, who's that? Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Janetta.
Okay. Well, I teach in middle school. I'm teaching math right now, but the past 2 years, I was teaching science. In 7th grade science, we do have to teach sex ed. So what our district does, we do send out a letter of consent, and parents can send it back if they don't want their child to participate. Because some parents, everyone has different perspectives, right? And as mentioned earlier, some of the students' perspectives come from a home base. So if they don't want to participate, they get an alternative curriculum to work on while we navigate through that. But I haven't really experienced any parents fighting back on the curriculum. Maybe like only 2 students out of the past 2-3 years did not want their parents didn't want them to participate in it. And unfortunately for them, I feel like they missed out on it, because what's being taught is like real life situations. And middle school the students are really like in a very gray shaded area. They have a lot of questions. And I think it's best that, I understand at home you can actually support it, Like maybe have those discussions with your student at home. Like, what did you learn today? And if you kind of disagree with what was taught, then have that discussion at home with your child to kind of balance it out. But I'll pass it over to Sarah so she can add to her experience.
Thank you. So because I teach younger kids, scholars, I haven't taught higher than second grade. So I'm constantly sensitive to the fact that parents might not want everything that I am open to teaching about taught the way that I think it should be taught. Basically, I teach the truth to my scholars. I don't sugarcoat it. I don't whitewash it. I call out the racism when it needs to be fully called out. I feel that it would be doing them a disservice if I didn't teach it that way. But what I do as far as the parents, I send home letters and I'm completely transparent. These are the topics I'm going to be discussing. If you want to have a conversation ahead of time so I can show you how I'm going to present the information, I am a complete open book with my families. I try to make sure that I really build those relationships prior to, so that the parents know I'm coming from a pure place. I'm not trying to, quote unquote, indoctrinate anybody. I'm just trying to teach students about all of these perspectives. When I teach about 9/11, I do it at an age appropriate level. Especially as somebody who grew up in the shadow of the city, it is very near and dear to my heart. It needs to be taught. This is a generation that has no idea about it because it was 20 years ago. I think it needs to get taught. I think all of the different cultures that are in my classroom need to be celebrated, and the good, bad, and the ugly need to be exposed. And doing that, I know can get backlash, but because I prevent it through the letters that I send home, I think that helps ease parents that I'm not doing anything shady because I'm transparent and upfront.
Yes, and I completely agree with you. Gary had mentioned something that building relationships with parents early on is it's key to that success. And I know Bobby wanted to speak a little bit on that as well. So let's take it over to you, Bobby.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that often a barrier to building an inclusive classroom is the fact that most schools, in my experience, have set itself up like a fortress in the middle of whatever city it resides in, right? So the service to the community is often barred, right? We'll tell a parent when they can come in, we'll tell a parent how they should come in, and we'll restrict them very much so. And so we've taught the community that they need to stay this far. And so when we want to do something, it's seen as this divide between us and them, right? And so if we're going to really build an inclusive classroom, we need to build an inclusive school where our community and our school are not divided on these things, because we've gotten the rhythm, the pulse for the community. We've centered our parents, right? Parents should be on our school boards, right? We should have parent seats. We should be doing things that are really transformational in our communities to show that we center their needs and their understandings, and we show that we have like a community wealth understanding of our the communities in which we serve.
Yes. I don't have the but we're going to give you that. And we're going to tap Gary in because I know he has another word to speak on that as well.
Well, I was going to say, Bobby hit it. That community and also the parents, keeping them involved and letting they need to be heard. A lot of the times when the parents don't know exactly what's going on at schools is because they don't really know the teachers. They just know this is a possible negative to their child, and then it's a whole nother thing that another issue comes up. But I know in general, hearing the parents and letting them know exactly what's going to be going on in your class I always send out usually I do it some type of overview is what I usually use, and kind of give the parents a perspective of where I'm going with the class and what my objective is. Many times I think that's possibly missed sometimes, and some teachers are hitting a very I want to say sensitive subject, and the parents are going to go left no matter what. So I think it's all and that all goes back to what we said before, was about building those relationships. If the parent kind of knows you and knows what type of person that you are, I think you can get a little bit further usually. So I think that's
Awesome.
about it.
Thank you so much for that. That word, Gary, that is absolutely correct. Our parents need to be involved, and it takes a village. So it's not just the educators, it's not just the students, it's not just the parents, but it's everybody working together as a collective to really to build them up, and not just academic, but the whole student. Before we end out this panel, because our time is almost done, but I want to end it out with a word from everybody. The last question is, what is the value in this work? What do you find the value to be in this work? And maybe what reforms or things that you may think need to happen or should happen to produce more culturally competent educators. So what is the value? Or you can answer the other question of what reforms need to happen. And we're going to start off with, we'll take it away with Sarah, and then we'll work our way down. Sarah, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So what I say, the value of this work is we're creating scholars that will one day be the adults that we have to then interact with. So if we pour into them and get them to see other perspectives, to understand somebody else's point of view, how to disagree without getting offended by every little thing, how to have an actual conversation with somebody that you don't agree with, but you still are respectful. All of these things help you be better humans. Because at the end of the day, we have human beings in front of us. We have somebody's baby, and that is their world, and it is our job to make them be a better human. I don't really care about standards. I care if my scholars leave my classroom a better human than they walked in, no matter what grade level I've taught. That is always my end goal.
Thank you, Sarah. It's all about bringing back that humanity. I agree. We're going to take it to Gary.
Yeah, I'm just going to take it back to basically that word empathy. We want these kids, and we need to be masters of empathy. That's what it basically gets down to. And we got to teach it early, start there. There is so much reform that still needs to be done. So reform wise, I would think about, even when it gets to the point of just hiring teachers, the HR is the person who basically, that it kind of starts there, how they're picking and how they have their practices for hiring. That can also needs to be looked at or reformed, definitely. And also too, back behind that, people just knowing their own biases. And until we can know ourselves and our own biases, that kind of impacts our behavior towards others. So until we can master that, that's a whole humanity reform right there, pretty much. Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna leave it right there on that, but we need to practice, we need more empathy, and we can go from there.
Amen to that. I agree too. Thank you so much, Gary. Let's take it over to Brandy.
So, to me, a part of the reform that needs to happen is our educational practices that happens in these colleges and universities. The way potential educators are being taught. We, even as for myself, I did not learn some of the the Black or colored, Black and brown, phenomenal educators until, a few years ago. When I took a class with Dr. Goldie Muhammad, when she exposed us to other phenomenal Black and brown educators that I had no idea about, because we are taught within our practices, those of us that went to school for education, we're taught some of the whiteness of education. And so we think that is the right way to do. And then when we start teaching in our classes, that's our approach, unless we do some outside learning, which many of us are doing. We're learning outside of our educational courses that we've taken before. That's the reform that needs to happen first. Like some of these practices that these 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-olds, these college kids are learning, we need to dismantle that. Something else that need the policies. I'm not really into, I'm learning, but I'm really not into the policies, but I'm learning that's where it starts too. Down to, dress code, the way that a child can wear their hair. Like that is an issue. That is a problem. The way that they have to walk down the hallways. Some of these schools, they have to walk down the hallways with their hands behind their backs. That is an issue. So some of the policies that's been created within these school systems and in the Department of Ed needs to change. So we need more leaders. We probably need more educators like ourselves and educate other educators that are from Teachers for Good Trouble and other programs or organizations that are alike to take charge. It's time for us to take charge to reform some of these negative practices. Value. I know you asked the question about value. This is what I believe. If you didn't become an educator to dismantle some of this burden, and what are you teaching for? Why did you become an educator? So you have to look at your own self-practices. We are literally molding and uplifting the young minds of, just like Sarah said, future adults. So these are the students that we have in front of us. We have a major influence, whether we know it or not. There's a major influence that we are having in front of them. So we are so valuable to these students. It goes beyond the curriculum. It goes beyond the standard. We are molding young adults. We are molding the future politicians, the lawyers, the entrepreneurs, the doctors, or whatever else they may be, the hairdressers, the nail techs. This is who we are molding. So we have to make sure that we are making wise, comfortable, being culturally responsive as well, choices within our classes as educators, because we are huge influencers within the community and within our own classes. So.
Well, that was a word, and I don't have the sound, but ra-ta-ta-ta for you, Brandy. Yes. All right, Daryl, can you share your perspective?
Of course. So, like Sarah said earlier, this is a human issue, right? We are humanizing curriculum. We are humanizing education. In order to do so, we need to make it inclusive. And to make it inclusive, we make it intersectional. And we keep broadening and broadening and broadening, right? Because we're bringing all these different stories. And by doing so, we make it equitable in terms of representation for these students, right? Being able to see someone look exactly like me in the textbooks, that's a huge thing. I'm currently going back to school for myself, and I was telling one of my colleagues, I'm like, this is the first article I've ever read by a Filipino American. In my entire 35 years, I've never read anyone that like looks like me with a similar last name, right? So with that, it leads to reform. And I think two main things for me, the textbooks need to be more inclusive. Right now, we have that mainstream white narrative, and we need to include LGBT. We need to include BIPOC. We need to include all these contributions of women who have helped multiple fields that we just don't talk about. And then on top of that too, I as a science teacher, always talk about, it's better to fight the virus than is to soothe the symptoms. While that is much easier with a rainbow sticker and a happy face, we need to fix the virus, right? So helping teachers in the credential program have more than just one weekend class of diversity and inclusion, and then that one week, yearly training that we all have to do, and have there be continuous dialogue will help that, right? Because, throwing back to Ladson Billings, we have this really big, not necessarily achievement gap, but education debt, right? That is historical, it's economic, it's sociopolitical, it's moral. So it's not necessarily just grades on a test. It's about more like authentic, holistic learning. I'm just going to end with one of our quotes I absolutely loved. It's, if we want to work towards the ideals of justice, we need to better understand the social and historical forces that connect us to each other.
Thank you so much, Daryl. You left us with a word too. You guys are just killing it, leaving all the gems. We're going to take it over to Bobby, and then we're going to end with Janetta.
Yes, I think, everyone said, so brilliantly the things that I wanted to contribute. I think if I were to add anything, we have to think about the levels of damage and harm that schools have done and the work that is necessary to repair, right? And so I think about it from like when teachers are prepared to come into our schools, right? We can't escape from the fact that 79% are going to be white women. What we can do is make sure that our training programs, and we can make sure that our vetting in our schools and in the colleges are such that they have to grapple with the biases that they're going to come in with, right? We are all socialized in a racist society. Like, we can't escape it. And so the unlearning that has to take place needs to be stamped for teachers. I don't care where they're coming from, because the thing that we've seen, January 6th didn't happen just because, like, randomly on January 6th. That is years of training. And there's no wonder that the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th thought they were justified. They walked through history classes that told them that, because every single time they walked into history class, they saw themselves, they saw their quote values, and they saw people being othered. And so when they espouse those beliefs, we have to go back to the schools and say, you know what, we did it wrong. And this work that we're doing is not only redemptive, but it's transformative in a new society that would say, you know what, we condemn that. Not only that, we're going to tackle it head on by teaching and inspiring our kids to be better humans.
And another bomb was dropped. I don't have the sound effects, but I can make them. Thank you, Bobby, so much. That was such a word, and empowering to know that we are change agents, and we have the opportunity to create that change. And Janetta Queen, we're going to leave off with you.
Yes, a lot of good stuff. Oh, my light. A lot of good stuff has been said. But going to the question about just what's the value in this? The work that we do as educators is so valuable, because, like it was mentioned before by Sarah, like, we're building humans. Our world would be a better place if we just build our children from the beginning. It's better to build a strong child than to repair one. And I think the work that we're doing from K through 12 is very important. And it starts by people like looking like us. Like Daryl mentioned, he said he never read a book with anyone that was like him. He never, I forgot who mentioned it, they never had someone who look like them as a teacher. And for my students, I'm a special ed teacher, so I have a very small population that I work with, but all the students come to me because they feel like they can relate to me. They feel my warmness. They want to be around someone who they feel cares about them. And I think that the more we come to work and we're like, in a good spirit, because not to make it about the teachers, but if we're not well, our kids won't be well. We're not able to pour out into them. So one thing I'd like to add to what's been said is, in order for us to continue the value in the work that we're doing, we have to take care of ourselves. We have to make sure that we are mentally well, we are emotionally well, we are spiritually well, and physically well, so we can do the work that we do. Because the work that we do is so much value, and it's a big task on us. Like, to be very transparent, last week I had 2 panic attacks, and I'm crying in the middle of my class, and my students are like, Miss Ellison, we love you. Going back to that empathy piece. Because they thought they were the cause of it. It was just a buildup of everything happening. But my students, they just start saying, we love you, we love you, we love you. And they told me to go home. So I was so proud of them on how they responded to me in my stress, that they told me to go home, that they didn't take me not being there as something like, oh, she doesn't care. So going back to what I was saying about I think we talked about it in the last question, that relationship building is so important to have those relationships with your students, because when you have that relationship with them, it becomes a holistic classroom, a holistic experience where every student, every person, whether it's the security guard, the principal, the parents, the teachers, everyone is working together to pour into that child and create the community that's safe. So, the work that we do, it matters. And sometimes we don't see it in the midst of it. But the thing is, just keep doing what you're doing and you will see it. You'll be so surprised how much what you say, what you wear, how you say things, how much it impacts our kids. So I just want to leave a word of encouragement to all those who might be frustrated because it's the beginning of the school year, teaching in a pandemic. What we're doing does matter, no matter what title you have, no matter how many kids you work with. Just take care of yourself. Taking care of self, mental wellness, and make sure that you take care of you so you can take care of the kids that you've been trusted with. Because it's a privilege to be a teacher. It's a lot of work, but it's a privilege to be able to go there each day and give your all and give your best, whether it's a car jam, music, whether it's like giving them good books that reflect them, whether it's giving them strategies to cope with the stress and the craziness of this world. No matter what it is, we all have our different gifts. Just know the work that we do, it does matter. And we got to take care of ourselves so we can do that good work. But that's it for me.
Yes, you said it's better to build than repair. That was a word in itself. And just thank you, Janetta, for also including us, because so many times we forget that we need to be okay too, and we need self-care too. And we have to do that work for ourselves so that we can do that work for our babies and our young scholars. And I just want to thank you guys. This panel was lit. So many gems were dropped. Y'all were just, everything. I'm empowered. I'm inspired. And I just think that I have hope because you guys are all amazing. These are the educators that are leading the way. And if only we can create more, it's just we're going to change the world, y'all. So thank you so much. I appreciate that. And wishing you blessings and love with this school year, because it is a wild one. But thank you guys.
Well, first off, let's go and drop some bombs and some hand claps for y'all.
There's the sound effects that I needed.
I want to say thank you, man, to that panel, because there were so many gems expressed during that entire time and so much vulnerability. And I think, the thing that makes community special is when we have safe spaces that we can tell our truths, whether it be Netta talking about her panic attacks, or Daryl talking about being a gay male Asian, being the first to experience it, not having someone that he could look to see a commonality there, or Sarah talking about celebrating her holiday that many of her students had no idea what was going on, or Brandy talking about affinity groups and the importance of having community and people that you have commonality with, Mr. Gary and Mr. Bobby, the gems that you all share. Like this right here this is what is special about Teacher Graham. This is what is special about the community that we have built, and why I'm so grateful to be a part of something so great, because the whole of it all just has so much substance and beautiful souls all around it. So thank y'all. Yes, and to Alexia, sis. Sis, you did your thing. You did your thing. Okay. Big goddess energy. All right.
Let's go.
I'm loving it, y'all. I'm loving it, y'all. This was Lex, you did a phenomenal job.
I appreciate that.
Phenomenal job.
Honey, I was shaking in my dancing shoes.
Yeah. Listen, I don't even know why. I don't know why.
I have anxiety. It might not seem like it, but I struggle, y'all, with I can do it for the kids. I could do it in the dance class. That's fine. But put me in front of adults and honey, I'm sweating all up under here.
Ah, she got that stress sweat. Listen, I think all of us can relate with that, right? We all deal with some form of like, anxiousness and that kind of thing. And my favorite Rakim quote is, the cure to anxiety is action, right?
Yeah.
And you was about that action today. Like you showed up, you showed out.
Hey.
You asked the questions, you kept the conversation flowing. You did a very, very good job. I'm
Thank
so
you. I appreciate that.
honored that you decided to be a part of this and that you did what you did here. Like this is it. Y'all give it up for Alexia Oprah.
Okay. Dang, y'all, I didn't even cry today. Look at that. Look at God.
Boy, I know you went through.
I kept my tears away.
This was a phenomenal virtual summit. I'm so grateful for everybody who purchased a ticket. I know some of you guys had issues like getting a link or something. So thank you for you all for being patient and allowing us to get the link to you. Please, the replay will be available right away on YouTube. So you can look up Teachers for Good Trouble on YouTube and you can watch the first few minutes that you guys might have missed if you didn't have the link. But thank you everybody for being here. Thank you to all of the panelists. This was so dope, so dope. I miss my Teachers for Good Trouble community. We've all been, just trying to make it right now. And I felt like it was important for us to get together. Lex, what was your favorite part of the evening? And what do you hope people take away?
My favorite part of the evening, I think, is just hearing from educators, like hearing from people who are in the work, who are invested, and just hearing the amazing just knowledge and insight and just the bombs dropped. Like we need that space. We need to feel empowered and respected in our own right and for our own intelligence and our own practice and just being able to be in community with so many dope people that are just invested in this work. We need that not just here, but in the whole education world.
Facts.
So that was my favorite part. What was yours, Shippy?
Man, my favorite part, it was, I don't know, man. I think it was the transparency by so many. One of the things that I think we don't get enough of is people just really telling their truth, especially when their truth doesn't highlight, the best moments. I think it's that vulnerability that lets us know real people exist outside of ourselves and that, it's not always all right. And that's all right. And that there are places for us to learn. And I mean, I think about like Kwame talking about, going to a predominantly white school and, different ways that we as people of color we could be guilty of perpetuating white supremacy norms and those type of things. Like it's that brutally honest combo that I think we need more of. And so that part is my favorite. And and then two, just being back with my Teachers for Good Trouble fam, the community, like everyone, Black Girls Teach team, like everybody who showed up today, the Revolutionary Educator Squad, like everybody who comes together to make Teachergram what it is. I'm just so happy to be a part of this community. And I look forward to seeing you guys on some future lives and different things that we'll be doing in the future. Lex, does anybody have anything they should be looking out from you in the coming future?
I don't know. So many different things. I'm trying just to stretch myself. This year, it's all about stretching. It's believing in the power of me and believing in the power of that village energy. And just, I want to be of service, the blessings that God has blessed me with, to be service to others with that gift that he has blessed me with. So spreading that joy, spreading positivity, and always learning and growing. We can't forget that part. So always learning, growing, and spreading joy to others is the goal this year.
Well, you are a definite joy today. A definite joy.
And I do want to shout out for Teachers for Good Trouble to visit our website, And if you're interested in getting involved, visit teachersforgoodtrouble.org. We do have meetings on the last Sunday of every month. So the next meeting will be coming up. And if you're interested, fill out the membership survey, and let's get involved and get into some good trouble.
Yes. Yes. Please, we have a petition that we should be turning in very soon to end standardized testing in schools. I encourage you all, please go to teachersforgoodtrouble.org, sign our petition, share our petition. We are coming up on being able to reach 35,000 signatures, and that's our goal, is to get 35,000 signatures to end standardized testing in schools, and especially during the pandemic. And I encourage you all, please, 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 please share this petition. All right, we have one of the largest signature banks of all petitions to end standardized testing. And you guys will help us to get exactly where we need to go. We want to get the change, and it's going to happen through policy, but we have to show people that we are a unified front on this matter. So please share this petition with your people, and let's get this change. Alexia, thank you so much.
Oh, hold on.
What up?
Before we go, I do want to shout out Shivi, and I do want to just give him his flowers and ask for support in his campaign. Visit brooksforatl.com. If you guys can donate, he is running, he is doing the thing, and he is trying to make change and be a word and a light, and just bringing a different experience to politics and in his area. So if you can visit his website for his campaign and donate, we are rooting for him, and we just wish him the best praise and love and support. So it's coming close. So donate, and share. And I know that would mean a lot to his campaign.
That was so kind of you. I really appreciate that. And, you know, tonight is not about me or my campaign, but to be honest, like the Teachers for Good Trouble community and the work that we did towards ending standardized testing had a lot to do in propelling me to run for office and to bring a teacher's voice to city council here in Atlanta. And, you know, this is important. And my hope is that other teachers see what we're doing here in Atlanta, and you guys get encouraged to run for office locally where you are, because we need more educators' voices at the table making the decisions that will get us the change that we deserve. So I appreciate you all. Alexia, thank you for being a whole jewel in light. I love you so much. I'm so grateful for you. Y'all, this has been fun. This has been great. And I look forward to seeing you guys on Instagram real soon. Y'all be blessed. We out.